I want to make the claim that Judaism in America is undergoing a very profound and dramatic change. And that it is moving from being a people and an experience focused on peoplehood to being a faith. And in that regard, it is becoming very much like Protestantism, only of the Jewish variety. In other words, what I want to argue in a certain way is that American Jews were the last ethnicity to give up the ethnic ghost. America is, as we know, extraordinarily corrosive of ethnic attachments. Now, that's obvious. The children and great-grandchildren of Swedes who came to America in 1910, and there were lots of Swedes who came, feel 100 years later zero attachment to Sweden, no Swedish, don't buy cell phones that are dafka made in Sweden. They don't care. It's just they are now they're just Americans, which, by the way, is part of the great success story of this country. This is an extraordinary country, which has been unbelievably welcoming to its immigrants, but it has been primarily welcoming to its immigrants by being corrosive of their original ethnic attachments. And the same thing can be said of the Irish who came at the beginning of the 20th century, and the Italians, and the Russians, and the Germans, and the Spanish. You know, we always focus about the Jews, because that's our story. And our story is different than everybody else's story, because 100 years later, we're sitting in this shul having a conversation about how to perpetuate the ethnicity that we still feel is very important. The Italians are not having that conversation. The Irish are not having that conversation. Neither were the Germans or the Russians. Is that Glenn Libet? The Germans or the Russians or whoever else, they gave up the ghost a very long time ago. There's nothing terribly wrong with that. We decided we didn't want to give up the ghost. And we invested hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in all sorts of different kinds of educational ventures to make sure that we would hold on. And we held on for longer than anybody else. But we can feel it slipping away. This is the generation where it really is slipping away. This is the generation, and there was actually a term like this in the scholarly literature. It's called Holocaust fatigue. 20 years ago, you talk Holocaust, you would evoke tears, you would get checks. 15 years ago, you talked Israel, you would evoke tears, you would get checks. You can still get tears, but you can't get checks. That we live in a world in which the things that used to be visceral kinds of attachments to young American Jews and their parents are no longer. People simply don't want to hear about the invasion of Hungary in 1930, whatever, or 1942 in that particular case. They just don't want to hear about it. 43 with Hungarian Jews. They don't want to hear about it. And Israel, as you know, arouses just as much consternation today as it does a sense of belonging. You are much more likely to arouse a sense of shame when you talk about Israel as you are a sense of pride. So what is happening over the course of, what's happened over the course of time, and what I think is really happening very much today, at the beginning of the 21st century, we're about a tenth of the way into it, a little bit more. What's happened in the 21st century, I think, is that American Jews have reconfigured Judaism in the model of groups that are distinctly American. And American groups are not ethnic, they are not peoples, they are religions. Now, you might say, well, what's bad about that? Judaism's a religion, we're in a shul. Well, that's true, but it's not the whole story. The way I would put it is this. American Jews basically have decided what Judaism should be by looking around them primarily at Protestantism. And they are reconfiguring Judaism to look like our version of Protestantism. Protestants are not a people. A Protestant in Miami, if there are any left, right? I know there's none in Boca, I checked. But there used to be, right? But a Protestant in Aventura, are there any left? Some? Okay. They do not wake up in the morning and have a visceral sense that Protestants in Taiwan, which there are some, and who live a very uncomfortable and unhappy existence, are their problem. A Protestant in Iowa feels no attachment to the very real suffering of Protestants in Taiwan. It is simply not their issue. And a Catholic who wakes up in Buenos Aires does not feel any particular loyalty or sense of obligation to a Catholic in Sicily. They just don't. But we, for a very long time, had Jews waking up in New York worrying about Jews in Odessa. We had Jews in Los Angeles waking up and worrying about Jews in Moscow. And there were days in which Jews all over this country opened up the morning paper and, like radar, focused first on the articles about Israel. Many of us in this room are still like that. Yesterday morning's Wall Street Journal, I can tell you, the Israel article was on page A9. Because I was staying with friends in Boca, she brought in the paper, I looked at the paper, that's it. More important, frankly, even than the big turned-over boat, which made for very interesting graphics, but it's not where my kishkas are at. My kishkas were at page A9 and the whole Iranian thing and what, etc., etc. But the more that American Jews have become American, the more American Jews have become less ethnic and more defining Judaism fundamentally as a religion and not a people. And the basic claim that I want to make is the following. Judaism cannot survive without peoplehood at its core. And unless we change directions, we are going to go the way of the Swedes and the Italians. What you have on the back table there, lox and bagels on a Sunday morning, will be all that it is. But that's not what Judaism is. What Judaism is something about the 6 orders of the Mishnah that were actually lined up here on the wall. I was sitting over there, so I thought, oh my God, they're missing one. But then I realized it's just on the side here, I can't see it. Because even in Florida, I know that there's not 5 orders of Mishnah, there's 6. But the basic claim that I want to make is that the idea that Judaism can survive as a mere Jewish/Hebrew version of what Protestantism is, I think, fundamentally flawed and very short-sighted.